Hey everyone, have you ever really thought about the difference between, say, mowing the lawn for your parents versus doing it for a neighbor to earn some cash? Well, today we're going to dive right into the world of work. We'll figure out what economists actually mean when they talk about labor, and we'll even get into some of the big challenges, like unemployment, that you're going to hear about for, well, the rest of your life. So let's get into it. So let's start with this question right here. What's the difference between work and a hobby? I mean, think about it. When does something you do, like, I don't know, playing guitar or coding a simple game, stop being just for fun and start becoming labor? It seems like a pretty simple question, but trust me, the answer is a huge deal in the world of economics. Okay, so let's get our first big idea sorted out. What is labor? We use that word all the time to just mean any kind of hard work. But for an economist, it's actually way more specific than that. And here it is, the key idea. It's not just about the effort you put in. For something to count as labor in an economic sense, it has to be done to earn a living, to get paid. So think about a professional chef cooking in a restaurant. That's labor. But you making an amazing dinner for your family, that's not, at least not in the economic definition. It's all about that paycheck. This slide really makes that difference pop. On the left, you've got a nurse, she's caring for a sick person, and it's her job, she gets paid for it. That's labor. But on the right, you have a mother doing basically the exact same thing for her own child. But since she's not getting paid, it's not considered economic labor. Now hold on to that thought, because it's super important for understanding how our economy works, and also what kinds of work it sometimes doesn't see. All right, now we're going to jump back in time a bit to a really famous idea from the 18th century that completely changed how we think about making things. And believe it or not, it all starts with something super simple, a tiny little pin. So this huge idea comes from a guy named Adam Smith, who's basically known as the father of modern economics. And his big insight was this. The secret to getting more stuff done wasn't just about people working harder. Nope, it was about working smarter by breaking a big job down into tiny little pieces. He explained it using a pin factory as an example. Instead of one person trying to make a whole pin from start to finish, he showed how you could split it up. So you've got one worker whose only job is to draw out the wire. The next person just straightens it. Another one just cuts it. Each worker becomes a total expert in their one little part of the process. And look at the results, it's absolutely mind-blowing. Smith figured that if one person tried to make a pin all by themselves, they might maybe make 10 in a day. But with this division of labor method, the same number of workers could pump out thousands. We're talking about a massive, massive jump in productivity. It was a total game changer. But, this system isn't perfect. It has its pros and cons. The huge advantage, of course, is that things get made way faster and cheaper, which is great for us as consumers. But what's the downside? Well, imagine your one and only job is to put the sharp point on a pin. All day, every single day. It would get so boring, right? Plus, you become super dependent on that one job. If a machine comes along that can do it better, you're out of work, and you're only an expert in, well, pointing pins. Okay, so remember that idea about paid versus unpaid work we talked about earlier with the nurse and the mother? Well, let's build on that now. Economists actually have names for these two types of work, productive and reproductive labor. Getting this difference is really key to understanding how our society runs, especially when we talk about things like gender roles. So on the left, you see a teacher. That's a perfect example of productive labor. It's a paid job, and it adds directly to the country's economy. But on the right, you see work that's just as essential, things like cooking, cleaning, taking care of the family. That's reproductive labor. It's the unpaid work that keeps households and society itself running, and historically, a huge amount of it has been done by women. And this chart really helps put some numbers to that. You can see that women are a really important part of India's formal workforce, especially in rural areas, but they still make up a smaller piece of the paid labor pie compared to men. And get this, a chart like this doesn't even begin to count all that unpaid reproductive labor we were just talking about. The history of work isn't just about getting more efficient. It's also a story of struggle, of people fighting for safer conditions and for basic fairness. And that fight has led to some really important laws that protect all of us. First up, let's talk about a system that was basically a form of modern slavery. It was designed to trap people in debt forever. This was called bonded labor. So imagine this. You need to borrow some money. So you agree to work for the person who lent it to you, but they pay you so little that you can never actually pay off the debt. It just keeps growing. People would be trapped for their entire lives, and sometimes that debt was even passed down to their children. It was a truly vicious cycle. So to finally break this terrible system, India passed a really important law in 1976, the Bonded Labor System Abolition Act. It was a huge step forward, designed to free people who were caught in this debt trap. All right, another really critical fight has been about protecting kids, making sure their childhood is for learning and playing, not for working in dangerous jobs. I mean, it's pretty clear, right? Child labor doesn't just put kids in harm's way. It robs them of their education, of their health, of their entire future. It stops them from getting the skills they need to build a good life for themselves. And that's exactly why laws like the Child Labor Act of 1986 are so important. It was created to ban kids from working in dangerous jobs and to regulate work in other areas. The goal is simple, but it's powerful. Keep children in the classroom and out of the factory. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about one of the biggest economic challenges any country can face: unemployment. It's something you hear about on the news all the time, but it turns out it's actually a lot more complicated than it sounds. See, it's not just one single problem. There are different kinds of unemployment. For example, you have seasonal unemployment. Think about a farmer who only has work during the growing season. Then there's industrial unemployment, which is what happens when, say, a new robot can do a factory worker's job faster. And a really big one for you guys to think about is educated unemployment. That's when someone goes to college, gets a degree, but then can't find a job in their field. If we want to solve unemployment, we have to understand all these different types. So we've covered a lot of ground, from what work even means to how it's organized, and the big challenges of fairness and finding a job in the first place. And that leaves us with this final massive question. Understanding all this is the first step, for sure. But what's next? As you start thinking about your own futures, what kind of world of work do you want to help create? How do we build an economy that's not just productive, but one that's also fair and gives people a sense of purpose? That right there is the big challenge for your generation. Thanks so much for joining me.